Hi, it's Jan Beta, and today we are going to take a look at one of my favorite dot matrix printers of all time, and that is this Epson RX-80. The reason that this is one of my favorite printers of all times is that it was actually the second printer I ever owned. Not this one, I was able to find one on eBay recently. I had this back in the early 90s. Used it with my Commodore 64, and then when I made the switch to the Amiga, I used it with my Amiga. It's a 9-pin dot matrix printer. These Epson printers were kind of super common back in the day because they were just super reliable compared to other models that were on the market. The Epson RX series of dot matrix printers was, I think, the second really widespread line of printers that Epson made. The first was the MX series, and then they expanded on that and updated it to the RX series. And the final series of dot matrix printers in the 80s was the FX series, and then they went on to make like LQ and LX and things like that, which had higher quality. These are like classic 9-pin, non-near letter quality printers, just dot matrix. Super reliable workhorses. Yeah, these were super popular back in the day, and I guess some of these might still be in use today. They are really well built, nothing much that can go wrong with them. Apparently there's still drivers available for modern operating systems for these from Epson directly, so I suppose there's still demand for drivers. You can actually get the ribbons for these pretty easily, pretty cheaply. I just bought one for I think €6 or something. They are still produced, if you can believe that. It's quite amazing. So if you're looking for a retro kind of printer, I recommend getting an Epson. They're still supported by the company that made them actually today, which is kind of mind-blowing. So this was the exact model I had when I was a kid, the RX-80. There's also an RX-80F-T model, which has the option to feed single sheets of paper in it. This only has a tractor feed. That's kind of the only option you get with these. Otherwise they are the same, I believe. I was able to find this on eBay quite a while back, actually. It was sitting in the lab here for quite a while. Today I'm going to take a closer look at this and tackle any problems that this might have, and I think it has quite a few. But let me kind of give you a little tour of this printer first. Actually, this is super simple, 3 buttons. There's an online button. I think you can reset the printer kind of if it runs into an error. Couple of LEDs to show the status, power, ready. There's a paper out sensor, so that there is a sensor in here that tells the printer that the paper is out, and it's showing that. It also has a little beeper speaker in there that indicates faults. Form feed, so you forward one whole page, and a line feed that forwards the paper, the tractor paper in this case, one line for each push of the button. There's also manual feed, obviously, as you would have on these. And there's a power switch, but that's all the elements that you can manage from the outside of the printer. Here's the back of the printer. We have our mains input. I think on the American version there's actually no socket, but a cable that's permanently attached. It has this nice paper feed thing on the back here, which allows for clean feeding of the tractor paper inside it. It is a really useful feature. Other printers don't have anything like this, so that makes things a whole lot easier paper management wise. Interestingly, this is the Centronics port, which was kind of the standard port at that point in time for printers. You can hook up computers that have a proper printer or parallel printer interface in them with a standard parallel cable. Like most of the PCs at that point had a printer interface card or parallel interface card. Some of them already had that on board, so you could just hook that up. The Amiga has a parallel port that works with this. Interestingly, on these printers, you can plug in interface cards for different systems that are not compatible with the Centronics printer interface. This one has one, I think, guessing by the shape of this connector, for Commodore PADs, or the PAD series of Commodore machines, which is pretty interesting. These are probably super rare. You would just plug this into a pin header on the circuit board in the printer. We're going to take a look at that shortly, and have the connector you would need for your system. There's also versions for other systems, obviously, like the Commodore 64. The one I had back in the day had a cheap Commodore 64 interface in this position, and you could just hook it up like an original Commodore printer, which had the serial Commodore bus, IEC bus. And that would allow to do that. How neat is that? And it's actually not too difficult to open this printer and change this interface card. So yeah, pretty neat feature. Yeah, on this side we have the manual paper feed that just pulls out in case you want to open the printer, which we're going to do shortly, as I said. Power button, power switch rather. Super nice, clunky. The whole thing is super heavy, and plastic is super thick, so these are built like tanks basically. I have to say I really like the design of this. It's very 80s, but on the other hand it's pretty timeless because it's so clean and simple. The brown tones and the beige probably wouldn't hold up very well today under normal circumstances, but I really enjoy this look of the printer. Super simple, super functional, nothing too fancy about it, just a workhorse kind of machine. I want to take this apart and take a look inside, and I already saw from my initial inspection that there are some minor or not so minor problems. We're going to take a look at that. In order to take this apart, this is actually pretty simple. You can just lift this cover up if you open it, and then you can just lift it straight out and you can look at the internal workings of the printer. So, and as you would expect, there's our ribbon cartridge. This one is particularly dry. There's there's a bit of ink in there still. But this is going to be replaced anyway. You can just pull this out with this handle. That's pretty neat as well. And then we have our print head with the pins in there and a ribbon cable that connects that to the circuitry inside. That's mostly under here. We have these rails the head travels on, and we have our paper feed mechanism, which is actually quite sophisticated. On this one we have these tractor feed pins that go through the holes on the tractor feed paper and then transport the paper through the printer. The simplicity of this also makes this super reliable. We probably have to clean this a whole lot. There's a lot of dust in there, and like relubricate these rails. This thing here also just unplugs by just pushing it together slightly. Can take that off. And there's actually the manual for this is still on the Internet Archive where I downloaded it. It's actually pretty easy to open this as laid out in that manual. I'm going to link that in the video description in case you want to take a look. There's actually only 2 screws you have to remove after doing this, and you have to remove a little plug that's under here for this panel. You have to disconnect that, you have to unplug the manual paper feed thing, which just pulls out ideally. Yes, it does. Here's the little plug you have to undo. That connects the panel with the controls to the rest of the printer. There we go. And then we are going to remove these 2 screws. So there's 1 screw here and there's 1 screw here. And now the whole top part of the case, if the manual is correct, should just pull up. Which it does. Nice. Let me take a couple of seconds to thank the sponsor for this video, PCBWay, my favorite manufacturer of prototype PCBs. They also have CNC machining and 3D printing services. The quality they deliver is excellent, the pricing is super reasonable, delivery is fast, they are friendly people to work with. They also have a PCB design contest going, and they are celebrating their anniversary soon, so there's lots of discounts and prizes you can win. If you're interested, check out the link in the video description. Back to the printer. Yeah, and here's what's in here. Lots of transistors. That's interesting. There's rows of transistors here. Bit of logic. This is the interface card, which has That's interesting. It has some of the MOS interface chips on here and some dip switches. It's a Görlitz Super Epson interface 2.2 and lots of dust in here and lots of huge capacitors. Huge transformer, as was common because all these things basically used linear power supplies. There's also a bridge rectifier in there and a voltage regulator, 7805, I guess. Oh, it's a C2516. I suppose that's some kind of voltage regulator. There's actually two bridge rectifiers in here. Smoothing capacitors, I suppose, for the power supply. I'm going to remove this interface card, which plugs in here. There's a connector on the board here. This seems super old school, but super sophisticated as well. This is from 1983, judging by the date codes on the chips. This is a 6532. There's a 6502, actually. That's interesting. That's the processor. 6502 processor on there, on this interface. And that's the MC6821, which is also, I believe, an I/O type of chip. There's a ROM. This is a super old school 462532 EEPROM. And I believe this is a bit of RAM even. This is a super sophisticated interface card. We're going to remove that to have a look at the original circuit board. These are unlabeled chips even. Yeah, we're going to take a look at this in a second. We're just going to remove it. This is screwed down as well. They use two different kinds of screws. One is a Phillips, the other one's just slot screws. I think most of the dirt is paper dust, actually. This should pull out in some way or the other. Yep, there we go. Okay, so this is awesome old tech here. It appears that this was made in 83. All the date codes I can see. There's some from 82 even on these logic chips, but most of them are from early 83. There's this Epson branded chip, which is probably the main control logic. There's a ROM in here, and I think it's a revision 2. Probably they updated the ROM on this at some point to support more features. And you can see there's two rows of dip switches here where you could set some options in these printers that are all clearly laid out in the manual. This needs a good cleaning, and then we're going to take a closer look. I love how this circuit board looks. And just says RXMB, probably RX mainboard. And then again, it says board. Maybe RXMB stands for something else. There's a unit number on here and the Epson logo, obviously. And we have this ribbon cable, which is the connector for the printhead, actually. And all these little transistors here that probably are both for actuating the motors that this has. One for the paper feed and one for the movement of the head. And then probably some of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Probably some of these are for powering the individual needles as well, I would say, the pins. It looks super neat, super well made. Some of these capacitors are super old, so probably it would be a good idea to replace some of them at some point. There's some super nasty tape over this Centronics connector that I'm going to have to clean up the residue of. Probably the previous owner put that on there to not confuse the connectors, because the other connector is the Centronics style connector, the same kind of connector but smaller pin count. Probably they put that on there so they are not confusing the connectors. Yeah, and then we have our two motors, one for the head placement and one for the paper feed. This is where the manual feed connects. You can see that working here. This needs a good cleaning. All the gears are dusty. Naturally, there's a lot of paper dust and things like that accumulating in these if they are used. And then this is our connector that goes to the little panel with the LEDs and the buttons. And there's the fuse on this separate board that also holds the power switch. Super neat design. This has a plug This is pretty modular. You can replace all the components. These were meant to be used in professional environments as well as for the home user. They are really well made generally. Nice ground screw that connects all the metal parts to ground. These tractor feet things they're clipped, and you can just move them if you remove these clips for different paper width, which is super easy to do and super reliable usually if the plastics don't break. Yeah, speaking of broken plastics, there's usually a spring that holds this down when it is closed. That goes from this point to this little stud here. And on both of these, there's two of these retaining things for the tractor feed paper. Both of these broke off on this flap here. So I'm going to have to try to remount this. Thankfully, both of these springs are still here. On this side, you can still see it. It's still hanging on to this one. And yeah, it supposedly goes here. You can probably see the broken off plastic there and hold this thing down. I don't think it's strictly necessary to have these in place, but it obviously makes the paper feed more reliable if this is held in place with these clamps. So I'm definitely going to try to reattach that. I'm going to have to clean this up. And I think I'm going to take a vacuum cleaner to it as a first pass and then do some more cleaning. There's quite a bit of dust in there. There's also this little lever here that you can adjust the head position a tiny little bit towards or away from the paper in case you have thicker materials to print. Yeah, all the gears seem to be intact. I would guess this still works, but we need to clean this a bit and see if it still works indeed. And probably lubricate the rails a bit and clean all the little parts, the mechanics. But first, let's give this kind of a good cleaning and remove the dust from it with a vacuum cleaner and a brush. I'm also going to try to clean this connector with some isopropanol. There's a lot of glue residue on there, but it seems like the pins are unaffected, thankfully. Yeah, I hope I can remove some of this. Yeah, this is kind of coming off with the alcohol. The glue is really nasty, so I'm using Q-tips to remove the rest of it. Add the alcohol sink in for a good while now. And you can still obviously buy these connectors, so worst case we're going to have to replace this with a new one. I'm also going to do a lot of cleaning on all these rails that the head travels on and relubricate it with some silicone grease. The same goes for all these little gears that I can see. I'm going to add some lubrication to those. This toothed rubber belt, it seems to be a bit deformed, but it should still be enough to make the head travel reliably, hopefully. So yeah, probably not going to do anything to that. No lubrication on that, obviously, because it needs to grip. But these rails are pretty dirty, so I'm going to use Q-tips and meticulously clean all these parts and relubricate them a bit to hopefully make it work. So I'm just going to do that. I'm not going to show you the whole process, I guess. Oh, okay, there's a lot on there. Wow. Can carefully move the head and clean this part as well. So I'm going to relubricate some of these rails Also using Q-tips and this silicone grease that I'm going to put a little bit on these rails so it can wipe in and spread over the whole length of them. When this gets used, if it works at all. Which I suppose that's probably what they did originally. So there was silicone grease usually on these rails, a tiny little amount. So things went a bit smoother. I'm going to lubricate the rails and some of the moving parts with that same stuff as well. Some of the gears. But this already moves a lot smoother than before. That's kind of neat. Already works well. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Also using some liquid silicone for some of these. So I think I pretty much lubricated all the moving parts now. And things are a lot smoother. And there's a lot of like paper dust residue everywhere, things like that. That's as is to be expected from a printer. Usually the old lubricant and the paper dust forms kind of a layer that prevents this from moving. But this all seems pretty good. So while I have this open, I'm also going to clean the case parts a bit. There's some dirt that accumulated around the edge of this as usual. So I'm just using some alcohol and a Q-tip to clean that up roughly. I don't want to take everything out of the case. It's pretty much everything that's in here now is screwed into the bottom case. And yeah, I don't want to take that stuff out. Probably going to do some more cleaning on the top part of the case. But this one. This part is going to need some cleaning as well. But as I said, kind of want to see if this works at all at this point. So I'm just going to put this back. So I'm loading some paper just for testing purposes after cleaning up this mess. This tractor feed paper is actually still available. So the way you feed this in here is to feed it through here, I believe. And then obviously we have to position these correctly. Definitely helps if you have these spring-loaded clips functioning, which I don't have yet. Clip this in, and then this should go somewhere like here. There we go. And as you can maybe see, it's not very reliably clipping into the paper without these spring-loaded things, but it does work somewhat. I want to plug this in and see what it does. We should put a ribbon back in. I'm probably going to load the new ribbon, which I bought online for €6. There's a little clip that you have to feed this through. And then kind of move this a bit so it's tight. Yeah, should be good to go, I think. Let's try this self-test. According to the manual, this should work without any computer or anything else connected. I'm just plugging this into the mains, basically. So let's try if this still powers on. Yep. And it says ready and online. It's a weird angle, but I can't move this really with the paper in there. Power LED lights up, the ready LED lights up. We don't get any fault beeps, which it would do if there was anything severely wrong with the circuitry. It also says online, you can switch that on and off. Line feed doesn't work. Oh, it does work if you turn it offline. Form feed should forward a whole sheet. We don't use that at the moment. I'm just going to turn it off again. If I turn it on while holding down line feed, it should actually do the self-test. So let's see. Holding down line feed while turning it on. Let's see what it does. Looks like a working printer to me. Nice. It appears to work. All the pins are there, it seems. Printing quality with the new ribbon is as you would expect from a 9-pin printer of that era. We have to adjust where the printing starts a bit because, yeah, as you can see, there's a bit of margin here and it prints over the perforated area here. So just going to move this tiny little bit over here. The noise is not half as bad as with the MPS 801 that I had tried in the previous video. Yeah, we have to get these springs back in there. That's not a good thing. Look at that! Fresh ribbon, very clean. Nice. And I can already tell that this is set to the German character set with the dip switches, which is one possibility because it has the umlauts in here and it came from Germany. So that's probably what you would do if you bought one of these. Or maybe the store even would do that for you, set the dip switches to the German character set. There's also, I think, French, Swedish, all kinds of character sets built in that you can reach with those dip switches. I think what's next is to try to fix these spring-loaded tractor feet retaining things. Yeah, so the basic functionality is there, which is great. I have to fix these though, because especially if you want to get the paper out the other way, so turn the manual tractor feet backwards, really. It's not, yeah, you can probably see them moving. It's not very reliably holding the paper in place. That's not good. Let's try to glue those back on, I guess. Also, massive feelings of nostalgia for me. Hearing this, feeling the paper in and things like that. I've done that so many times back in the day. And now I finally have one back. That is the exact one I had. Nothing like the warm feelings of nostalgia you get from an inanimate object like this. I love it. So here's the spots where the plastic broke off. I'm going to try to glue that back on, I think, with some plastic glue. Yeah, let's try that. I'm not quite sure if this works as a printer on a computer yet, but we're going to find that out as well. I'm not very confident that this is going to work, but we're going to see. Worth a try, at least. So here's what these things look like now. They have the springs still attached to them, which is not ideal. I'm going to try to remove the plastic part from the spring. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to try to use my Uhu Plast special on this, which is a mostly acetone-based plastic glue. I'm just going to apply here and on the little part. And then I'm going to try to place it on there. There's some plastics that this stuff doesn't work on at all. Oh, it actually feels like it's sticking. Probably a good idea to strengthen this with some epoxy. It's doing something. We're going to see if this works at all. This needs like half an hour to cure or something, then it should be completely solid. Just let me do the other one as well, in the same way. Yeah, kind of a shot in the dark. I'm not sure if my glue is doing anything to this. Yeah, both of these are back in place now. I'm going to let the glue settle and see if that actually holds up. I'm not sure. A couple of hours later, my glued on parts seem to be rock solid. So the glue actually worked on this kind of plastic. However, I'm still going to double this up with a bit of epoxy from the side that the spring is not attached. So the flat side on these half circles. Going to put a bit of epoxy on there just to make sure that they can withstand the pressure or the pull of the springs. And this is like a model making 5-minute epoxy. So that should be as sturdy as I can possibly get this. Now to let that glue dry as well. Okay, I let this cure overnight just to be sure this is perfectly cured. We're going to find out if it can support the springs. I'm going to use one of these, which is a dental tool used by dentists actually commonly. So these are super handy for kind of these tricky small parts. It's a bit of a hook shape, so we can probably get the springs in there somehow. We're going to see. It's not meant to be removed, I guess. Ha! And it broke off again. Dang! Okay, there's a lot of force going on there. It felt so good, but it just broke off again. It snapped off again. Plastic probably is super brittle and my gluing wasn't sufficient. Worth a try, I guess. I'm just going to try to put the spring into the other side just for giggles. Let's see. Maybe it works better on this side for some reason. No. Yeah, as you've seen, there's a lot of tension on these springs. I mean, you could possibly put some kind of screw in there, but I'm not sure. Maybe somebody has an idea. I can't really drill through this from the backside because the whole mechanism is there that moves this. And yeah, it's a solid piece of plastic basically. Could drill a little hole from here and put a screw in and hope that that works, but not confident that that is not going to destroy the whole construction. I'm probably going to try to put a rubber band over this whole thing so it kind of holds it in place. Maybe that's a good idea. So, found myself a small rubber band. Possibly not very good to see on camera. So I'm going to hook that into the bottom here, which should work fine. And then we just put it over this whole piece here maybe. Yeah, that does something. There's some tension on here, so maybe that's a way to fix this. So I just used the little protrusion where the spring would hook into and put the rubber band over here. Probably could use a bit of tape on here to fix it in place. But that at least gives me some kind of downward force on this piece here. It's a workaround, but it's probably going to work fine. Maybe we need a rubber band with another tension. It's not too bad actually. As I said, this is a workaround. If you have any better ideas for this, if you've seen this thing, let me know in the comments. I am going to give this top half of the case a good cleaning, and I'm going to take the electronics part out. It should just be 2 screws and this whole thing should unclip, and then reassemble the whole thing and try to use it on an actual computer. There's just 2 little Phillips screws on this board, which are sealed with some glue, it seems. And now, I suppose, yes, it just clips in and we can remove it. And actually, the protective film is still on here. Ooh, we're going to remove that later. And this is all plastic now. The whole case should go into some water. So after some tinkering, I settled with the rubber band idea for now, until I come up with a better idea. And I actually used some small belts like these meant to be used on cassette recorders and things like that. I bought a huge pack of those a while back to have some spares in case some belts need replaced. And it seems there's enough pull on these to hold these down, and hopefully the paper will feed in there. I also cleaned up the case, which cleaned up rather nicely. There's still some darker spots in there, and there's some little dents in there and things like that. The inside didn't clean up all that well. I think most of this is like ink, and yeah, it kind of didn't clean up at all, nearly. But that's the inside. That's nothing much to worry about. The outside looks pretty shiny. There's a very tiny amount of yellowing on here, I think, but not really enough to justify retrobrighting this. I'm pretty satisfied with how this turned out. And another thing I realized is that we also still have the protective film on this. And I'm going to remove that now, because that is yellowed. I think the actual badge is not yellowed at all. Yeah, there's some glue residue on there. Try to carefully remove that. It is nice. I like it. I'm going to clean that off later. I'm also going to remove the film, the protective film from this part here. It just kind of looks new. Just give this a quick wipe with some alcohol as well, while it's out of the case. These buttons are a bit yellowed, but yeah, I can't really be bothered to retrobrite them or anything like that. Okay, I'm going to put that back in the top half of the case, and I'm going to put everything back together, I guess. This part gets a bit of window cleaner, and so is this paper feed mechanism thing. Yeah, nearly as good as new. So this goes back in here like so. So this is back in. We have to put our manual paper feed back on. So now comes the moment to feed this through these. Yeah, that works. And it actually wasn't too difficult to do this with my springs in there, my belts. Actually works pretty well. It works! Okay, let's hook this up to a computer and see if it works, if that part of the printer works. The printing mechanism and paper feed mechanism seems to be back in business. I didn't tell you that I actually tried this when I got it. And I did remember when I started this video. And with the old ribbon in there, and before lubricating and cleaning it, it would run the self-test and it would start to print, but after about 3 lines of printing, which wasn't visible because the ribbon was so dried up, it would stop with an error and the beeper would beep. We definitely made it work better with our cleaning efforts, or with my cleaning efforts there. Let's see if we can hook this up to a computer and actually use the computer to print something that is a bit more reasonable than the whole character set over and over again. I have my Amiga 600, which is the smallest computer with a parallel port that I own, hooked up here, put it up to Workbench, and I'm going to set the printer driver at this point. I'm going to use, I think, Epson X Old, which I think is suitable for these older Epson X series printers. Maybe Epson X, I'm not quite sure. The printer port is parallel. It's just a generic parallel to Centronics cable. That was challenging to find because I knew I had one of those somewhere. But as usual, I didn't know exactly where. And I went through all my boxes with like generic cables, miscellaneous cables, and I didn't find it. And I was so sure I had one. I also looked in the Amiga box where I store my Amiga peripherals and cables and things like that, and I didn't find it. And then I kind of had the idea of opening my C64 peripherals box, and there it was. And the C64 doesn't even have DB25, I think it is parallel port. So I have no idea how this cable ended up there. In any case, I found it in the end. Yeah, we should now be all set to use this printer actually. Oh, we can print a screenshot. That would be neat. I think it's actually printing a screenshot, which looks kind of messed up, but it is a screenshot of the actual screen. We have communication between the computer and the printer. Yay! Ta-da! Okay, so it basically works. I'm going to try the other Epson driver, I think. So I've changed the printer driver to Epson X, not the Epson X old one. And the printer reacts. It does work. And funnily enough, this is printing bidirectional as long as you print text from the internal character set. But for graphics, it only prints in one direction. So it's a lot slower with graphics. Yay. Yeah, that's about the quality you got without any more tinkering in software from a 9-pin dot matrix printer of this vintage on an Amiga. Yeah, I really have like a permanent grin on my face at this point because this makes me just incredibly happy. All the nostalgia. Hearing this printer just evoked so much nostalgia in me. And seeing it work and hooked up to an Amiga, a more modern one than I had back in the day, but nevertheless, it is working with the Amiga, and it's the same model I used on my Amiga 500 back in the day. That was my workaround with the little belts to hold down the clamps for the paper. Not the best, but it seems to work fine, and as long as you don't remove and insert paper all the time, it should be good. The only issue is that while inserting the paper, you have to take care that the little belts don't slip. Other than that, this is perfectly working, so I'm super happy. I think I mentioned that I'm super happy. Future plans for this printer involve trying different interfaces for different systems. I have the PET and CBM series interface, as you've seen, that was in here. I have actually the interface that I used with this on my Commodore 64 on order. I found that on eBay. They are super rare, but that's for another video. I'm going to tell you all about how to hook this up to other systems in another video, hopefully, if everything works out. For now, I'm super happy that I got this to work again after it beeped on me when I first tried this. Just a bit of cleaning and lubrications. These usually don't cause any issues. They are built like tanks, as you've seen. Probably I'm going to replace the capacitors in this because this is now nearly 40 years old, made in 1983. So that's the future plans. I'm going to make another video about interfacing this with other systems as soon as I have the interfaces at hand. That's it for today. Stay tuned for more if you want. Thank you very much for supporting me on Patreon and on the YouTube channel memberships page and on Ko-fi. The links are in the video description in case you want to give me some support. Hope to see you again on this channel. I'm Jan Beta. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.